Hello, what's up guys? Welcome to in my channel Horror Tales. I'm a werewolf, and I'm afraid of my human girlfriend. I think I wanted it at first. Being a werewolf was such a chaotic, wild experience. Constantly hanging on the edge of control, staring into the chasm of instinct and impulse, seeing how long I could teeter on the border of sanity. Melissa represented caution, discipline, and control. It had been like a sigh of relief, a release from responsibility, to be on a metaphorical leash. She grounded me, policed me, made sure I kept my nose clean. It started out self-imposed. I chose to stay in for the nights, chose to stay human. I couldn't let her find out about my condition. And on top of that, she was the perfect excuse to get me out of the weekly, if not nightly, hunts my pack always dragged me along for. After a while, though, I'm not exactly sure when, it stopped being self-imposed. After holding back from my carnal nature for a period of time, I began to crave it, but every time I decided to leave, my heart would start pounding. I'd start looking over my shoulder as I got ready, feeling guilty and, for some reason, apprehensive, these feelings strong enough to dissuade me from leaving. I remember the first time I saw Melissa standing in the threshold between the dining room and the kitchen, her hands on her hips, her eyes dull and calculating. My hand was on the doorknob, and she regarded me, frozen in that position, like an alpha would a pup who'd taken more than his fair share of a kill. "Where are you going?" she asked. I swallowed, my mind searching for an explanation. I couldn't tell her I was a werewolf going to run with the pack. You're not leaving for the night, are you?" she said as her head leaned to one side critically. It was a question, but it wasn't a question. I turned my head aside, my heart beating heavily in my chest. For a moment, indignation rose in me. I was a werewolf, a terrifying beast of the night. How dare that mere human instill such fear in me? My eyes happened to glance out the window, and I saw the empty trash bin still sitting down at the end of the driveway. Relief flooded through me, and before I could think about what I was saying, I spoke. "Of course not. I just happened to see the trash cans out there. Forgot to bring them in earlier, so I figured I'd run out and grab them now." At that, Melissa's thin line of a mouth curled into a smile, and she nodded. My quest for the trash cans had been approved. I turned away from her and opened the door, and that's when she said it, quietly, but loud enough for me to hear. "Good boy." The hair on my arms stood up, and I paused in the doorway. My breaths became heavier as thoughts and emotions raced through me, but I shoved all the implications aside. The trash needed to be brought in. That was a few weeks ago, and now the leash felt more like a noose. Every rebellious thought I had, every time I tried to pull away, I felt this closing grip around my throat, as pulling away only tightened the knot. Eventually, however, the need to leave, to run, and to hunt was left so long unsated. It grew to match the feelings that held me back. Over the course of a few days, I built up the courage to confront Melissa, and on the night I told my pack I would join them, I approached her. I opened the door to the basement, and the rattling sound of the washing machine bounced up the stairwell to my ears. I swallowed and descended. The basement was unfinished, and Melissa stood on the concrete floor in front of the washer and dryer, two shining white pieces of machinery in an otherwise gray and brown basement. A single incandescent light bulb with a pull string hung over Melissa's head like a one-dimensional halo, casting hard shadows about the room. I reached the bottom of the stairs and waited. She was finishing up setting the dryer to run, and I didn't want to interrupt her. Finally, the dryer hummed to life, joining the running washing machine in a chorus of mechanical grumbles and clicks. Melissa heaved a basket of clean laundry up to rest on her hip, and she turned. "Oh, Terry, did you need something?" My voice caught in my throat, and I stared at her dumbly for a few moments. Her eyes narrowed at me, and shiver ran down my spine. "Something the matter, Terry?" she asked. I cleared my throat and steeled myself. "Some friends of mine are going out for the night, and I'd like to—" I stopped as the noose tightened. Melissa's face hadn't changed, but somehow it had. Her gaze burned into me. I could almost feel my skin peeling and curling from the heat. My eyes fell away from hers and settled on the basket weighing heavily on her hip. I took a step forwards and reached out my arms towards the laundry. Here, let me take that." I can carry it upstairs so. My voice trailed off as Melissa made no movement to allow me to take custody of the laundry basket. She just held her piercing gaze on me. Some friends of yours are going out for the night, and you? You'd like to? She echoed, using my exact tone until she curled the end of it into a question. My head dipped submissively, but I pressed on. I'd like to, I swallowed and furrowed my brow. No, my words would not be a question or a request. I raised my head to meet her gaze. I'm going to head out with Ash. And you're telling me this at 9:30 at night? She asked sharply. My gut twisted. Well, I didn't mean to wait so long, time got away from me. Here, let me take that laundry basket. I didn't think we had anything planned for this evening, so I didn't think about mentioning it until now. I rattled off as I reached again for the basket hanging on her hip. Again, she made no move to hand it to me. Upstairs, she stated, her voice terrifyingly devoid of emotion. My entire body tensed up. I didn't move. Melissa stepped around me and started up the stairs, her footstep heavy with the weight of the laundry she lugged along. I listened to her ascend, but heard her stop at the top of the stairs. The floor creaked as she turned to regard me. Come. My feet moved without thinking. My head stayed down. I traipsed up the stairs behind her and followed her as she walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. She set the basket down in front of her and then patted the seat beside her. I moved to it and sat. Help me fold this laundry. Since you've been staying here, I've got double the amount I usually do. After this, I've got 2 more loads coming through, she told me. My voice came out quietly. Last time I tried to help, you told me I was folding things the wrong way. And now you know the right way, she stated cheerfully. I felt a heat begin to rise in my chest. You just want me to help so I can't go out. Silence hung in the room like a fog. Melissa said nothing, so I stood up. Down, she ordered. My body almost listened instinctively, and that made me angry. I let out a snarl and faced her, my heart pounding in my chest. You do not order me around like that. I will tolerate it no longer. Melissa turned her icy cold glare to me, and it took everything I had not to falter. I said, down, she repeated. My lips peeled back in furious grimace, baring my teeth. Who do you think you are? Melissa's lip twitched, and then her mouth creased into a frown. Don't push it, she warned me. I laughed, incredulous. Don't push it? You've been pushing me around for weeks. I'm going out tonight, whether you like it or not. I stormed off towards the front door. Terry, stay, Melissa barked. I felt compulsion grip my chest, but it only infuriated me more. Something in me snapped, and a burning sensation spread through my entire body. I was going to change, I couldn't stop it, and I was fine with that. I hunched over as my bones and muscles twisted and snapped and grew. I felt my face stretch into a pointed snout, and hair crawled through every inch of my skin. My teeth grew, my canines sharpened, my clothes ripped and parted into shreds. I let out a deep guttural growl and spun to face Melissa. I would see fear in her eyes. I would see in her the same apprehension she instilled in me. I reveled in the thought of her shrinking away, terrified of my true form, but the woman was doing no such thing. Slowly she rose and stepped away from the couch, regarding me. With something like disappointment, and perhaps a bit of pity, rage overtook me, and I lunged at her with a snarl. Melissa stood her ground, and I stopped an inch from her face. There was no fear, no apprehension, no sense of mortal danger from her. I was several feet taller than her in my true form, and yet somehow she looked down on me. Her shape didn't change, but in my head, she grew. She grew bigger than me, and she was stronger than me. That's what her eyes said. That's what her posture told me, and I could not bring myself to argue. Sit, she commanded, her face twitching into a moment of a grimace as she spoke. My jaw snapped shut, and I fell to my hindquarters. Melissa's hand curled into a fist, save her index finger which pointed to the ground. Lay down. Defeated, I let out a slight whimper as I willingly collapsed to the floor, placing my chin on the ground at her feet. Now, stay, she bid me, a hint of irresistible softness entering her voice. I stayed there for a few moments and did nothing but breathe. Melissa slowly lowered herself into a squat, and her hand rested upon my head. Her knuckles curled, and she scratched through the fur between my ears. "Good boy," she cooed quietly. I felt my body relax, and a euphoric sensation spread through every inch of my being. And I had never been more afraid. Werewolves are not what I expected. My name is Amish. I am a 21-year-old college student, living on the outskirts of city name omitted. My dad had bought this house ahead of time, planning for my college, and I was grateful for that. He had installed metal security screens on all the windows and door to prevent intruders from getting into the house since it was isolated, with the nearest neighbors being more than 3 miles away. There was a woods-like area, less than 100 meters from my house, and I often visited it with some of my college's friends. We started campfires, got stoned, and just chilled in the woods. We never encountered any wild animals, except maybe a wild dog or a monkey here or there, but nothing too threatening. Yesterday, my friends came over. It was my birthday. We got drunk, danced, ordered a shit ton of pizzas, and enjoyed ourselves. After the majority of my friends had left, and only my best friends remained, we decided that it'd be best if they slept over. At 1 a.m., we decided to go into the woods, start a campfire, and enjoy beer while playing Spin the Bottle and giving each other dares. We started off with stupid dares like DMINGXs and posting weird tweets, and since none of us were of the imaginative kind, we were having a really good time fooling around. Eventually, my friend Mike dared me to go into the woods and click a picture on the far end of the woods. I wasn't in the mood to get bit by a wild insect or to get chased by a wild dog and couldn't even think straight. So I asked Mike to give me some other dare and stop being silly. They all chuckled and imitated a chicken. "You aren't so tough after all, big guy, are you?" said Katie in between snickers. I was frustrated. "Screw you guys," I whispered under my breath before getting up and walking into the woods. I had my phone on me, so I used its flashlight to navigate through the forest. While I was in the middle of the woods, surrounded by trees and bushes, I noticed motion in my peripheral vision. I looked straight towards the bush through which I noticed the movement and started walking towards it. I could not see a thing. As soon as I walked into the bush, I heard a low growl and the sounds of quick, heavy footsteps. I walked through the bushes but found nothing/no one. "Yeah, super funny, guys." I looked around and exclaimed in the darkness. Now that I look back at it, doing this while drunk wasn't the best idea, to be honest, since I would have grabbed the attention of all the creatures nearby. I dismissed it as a wild puppy or a bunny or something and continued walking deeper into the woods. I arrived at the end of woods and turned off my phone's flashlight, then took a selfie. I quickly snapped a few more photos before starting back to the campfire. It was 2:30 a.m. by now, and I was more than halfway through to my friends. I had this sudden urge to check out how the photos actually looked, so I unlocked my phone and looked through to the photos. To my horror, there was a mangled deer carcass hanging from a tree. Its eyes were slashed right out, blood poured from its stomach, or what remained of its stomach. Its back had a giant bit more, resembling that of a dog or a wolf. I threw up at the horrid sight. How could have I not noticed it? I thought to myself. I continued to walk towards the campfire, now getting both scared and desperate. Just before the campfire was in sight, I heard roaring and people crying out for help. When I connected the dots in my head, I came to a disturbing realization. I ran as fast as I could towards the sounds, only to see 3 of my friends' headless, mangled bodies around the campfire. All their bodies were mangled. I saw Mike running towards the house. Before I could even fully process what was happening, a bipedal wolf-like creature came sprinting down. It dug its claws in Mike's back. I heard him shriek before the creature put its jaws around his neck and snapped his neck clean in half. I closed my eyes and ran backwards, back into the woods. I couldn't watch the whole ordeal and was pretty sure that the creature had noticed me. Because of the darkness, I could not make out any features of the creature except a long snout with giant fangs and the pale green color of its skin. It stood almost at 9 feet tall and had talon-like claws in both its hands. Something in my heart told me to run and climb a tree, since I knew damn well I could not outrun it. I quickly climbed up a tree and hid within its large leaves, peeking through them. I could see it pass by every couple of seconds, probably looking for me. At 4 a.m., I decided to climb down and run to my house since I hadn't seen it for a good 15 minutes. I took a deep breath and sprinted towards my house. My heart skipped a beat when I realized a pair of footsteps had followed me. I heard it growl and braces for impact. I knew it had lunges towards me. It jumped on top of me and let out a blood-curdling screech. I could now see its face clearly. It had clear blue eyes and grayish-green fur on its face. It looked like a wolf but had a much muscular frame. I felt suffocated under its weight. My life flashed before me. Babe, I closed my eyes, just hoping and praying it'd kill me in one swift blow. But then it got off me and roared. I stood up quickly to see another werewolf, charging towards the clear blue-eyed one. This other werewolf has glowing red eyes and white fur. It looked taller than the one trying to attack me, but was definitely lighter. They locked claw and bit down on each other. A purple liquid, what I assumed to be their blood, splattered everywhere. Their collision gave me enough time to run to my house. As soon as I entered, I noticed that the house was in ruins. The metal screens were broken and blood was smeared on the walls. I immediately dialed up the cops, but realized that I had no connectivity. It was weird since there was a mobile tower just next to my house. Peeked through the window to see both the beasts were purposely damaging the mobile tower with their brute strength. They were a lot more intelligent than I initially thought. The white one looked towards me as it almost gave me a smirk. I escaped my house, laid low, and am currently in a small makeshift hut. Typing this out, the internet connectivity is almost non-existent, so I don't even know if this message will reach out to you or not. I will keep updating you guys. If I am alive, unfortunately my phone is going to die on me in a few minutes. I can hear their howls in the distance. Don't blame me. I voted for the werewolf. Classic scares. Politics is weird, right? Well, nobody predicted the presidential race would be decided between a werewolf and a vampire. The vampire won handily. That damn hypnotic gaze is cheating, I says. And now we live in a hellish dystopia of blood-sucking bureaucrats. Come to think of it, I guess we did before, but now it's literal. I mean, think about it. If Senator Howler had been elected, he would have been a regular president pretty much all of the time. We'd only have to worry about him being out at night during a full moon. That's it. And I guess the Secret Service would have to worry about assassins carrying silver bullets, but they already worry about regular bullets, so what's the big deal? But no, America had to be enthralled by then-candidate Amelia Life-Drain's smoky words and striking beauty. She said she was older than the country itself, and she personally knew George Washington, that she lived through the Civil War and the Great Depression, that she knew what pitfalls to avoid to preserve the glory of the nation for generations to come. The real kicker was when she started filming those hokey commercials with her zombie husband and those dead-eyed kids, but they used CGI and lighting tricks to make them look kind of normal. At the end of every commercial, she would look directly into the camera and turn on that hypnotic gaze, telling the audience to search their hearts to know they really wanted to vote Amelia for president. What you've got to keep in mind is politics was pretty normal until relatively recently. Vampires and werewolves were considered mythical creatures, the stuff of fairy tales and ghost stories. But everything changed when Abraham Howler ran for Congress on an environmental protection platform. When he was re-elected several times before running for Senate, he came out of the lycanthropic closet, proudly declaring himself a vegetarian who was more concerned with preserving his habitat than making humans hors d'oeuvres. He quickly became the face of a new supernatural American movement, which divided along party lines when the vampires made themselves known. For untold centuries, vampires wanted to remain legend, but they couldn't keep hiding when a viral video showed body camera footage of a police officer being decapitated by a feral fiend who drank his blood as it gushed from his arteries. Soon, lobbying groups sprang up to promote vampires as stylish, cosmopolitan champions of human excellence. After all, they argued, the better life is for people, the better people taste. Somehow, the effort worked, although I'll say again, their hypnotic powers make you act outside of your own best interests. When Amelia announced her candidacy, she did a PR blitz with older, established media types who acted like they had known her for years, presumably because they did. She claimed she was over 600 years old, but she didn't look a day over 25. That was a bit of a detriment as voters initially favored a more mature candidate. She won her party's nomination by holding a marathon series of midnight whistle-stop tours in which she glad-handed with the public and kissed babies without eating them. The gloves came off after the national conventions. With the candidates set, Someone started photoshopping a collar and leash on pictures of Senator Howler, and people took turns showing which special interest groups were the master he was secretly serving. Other trolls would throw dog food at his campaign headquarters, while still bolder ones would dress up as a werewolf in a business suit and terrorize people at night in public parks and other open spaces. Many in the media speculated this was a guerrilla campaign by vampires and their supporters to make the case that only one supernatural being was the choice to be the commander-in-chief. Amelia's competition had some tricks up his sleeve. Senator Howler would invite Mrs. Lifedrain to debate him at town hall venues, but he would schedule them for daytime hours and act shocked when she didn't show up. Then he would spout out these little zingers to endear the public to him, like when he asked the other candidate how she could stand to look at herself in the mirror. Then he'd wait a second before giving that deadpan look to the audience as they caught on. He argued that under a Lifedrain administration, the retirement age would be eliminated because vampires never age, and they never worry about retirement or medical bills. He also said she would look for ways to increase the supply of blood donors for her vampire friends, such as broadening use of the death penalty or mandating blood donations by every citizen. He was right, by the way. I look like a junkie from the track marks on my arm. Weekly donations are required by law, and missing them is punishable by, you guessed it, death by exsanguination. There were some live debates between the candidates in the evening hours. In one of them, some seemingly random guy in the audience ran over to the window and ripped down the curtain, letting the light of the full moon drape Senator Howler and start his transformation on live television. I'm sure that guy was in the pocket of big blood. The pundits said he saved his candidacy by keeping his composure as he changed. He didn't attack anyone in the room. He smashed through the window and ran off into the night. I bet he was embarrassed in the morning when he turned back into a human. There were reports he walked into his campaign headquarters naked, with a newspaper covering his naughty bits. The headline over his privates reportedly read, "Senator runs after debate fireworks." The dirty tricks didn't stop there. Some anti-vamps tried to stake out Lifedrain's crypt, so to speak, but her familiars kept them from getting to her coffin. Another protester put a giant crucifix in her front yard, but one of her acolytes set it on fire and the discussion became racial rather than immortal. At a fundraiser on a yacht, a priest showed up to bless the lake and turn it into holy water, but when he tried to push Amelia into the water, she dodged his shove and sent him in the drink instead. The media was so slanted it was ridiculous. They loved how photogenic Lifedrain was, how she radiated when she entered a room, how she made every reporter feel like she really savored every last drop of their interviews. By comparison, the newspapers were all trying to one-up each other on Howler headlines. Howler brought to heel, or students say Howler barking up wrong tree, and even roll up this paper to scold the senator. It was an absolute circus. Come Halloween, there were so many political costumes it was hard to count. Everyone was celebrating the holiday, their favorite spooky stories come to life, and the election of a lifetime. Even the kids who knocked on my door were mostly dressed in little business suits with political pins on their tiny lapels. Some made scary versions with vampire fangs and fake blood, or they would come running up to the door on all fours to beg for candy. The polls drew closer about a week before election night. A Twitter post showed a video claiming to be Lifedrain feeding on a staffer backstage during a public appearance. The victim came forward and said he had volunteered to serve the campaign in any way he could, and that he was not attacked. After a few days of mixed coverage, Amelia Lifedrain held a press conference and announced that she had never once taken blood without consent, and that this gotcha journalism was equivalent to secret recordings of women eating, which she argued was a form of body shaming. By election day, it was clear she had recovered from the incident and would go on to win. Senator Howler gave a concession speech in which he promised to continue his fight for the public and the environment through his senior position in the upper chamber. It was an emotional, difficult speech for him, but the media wouldn't let him have his dignity. The headline, Howler vows to lead Senate PAC. During the inauguration, President Lifedrain refused to change tradition, aside from the ceremony being held at night. She was sworn in on a holy Bible, the skin of her hand boiling the entire time she touched it. During her inaugural address, President Lifedrain said her first goal was to curtail the nation's homeless epidemic. It sounded great until we found out what her plan was to reduce their population. Soon, it was trendy to become a vampire. Every power player in Washington became nocturnal to keep a close feel on the pulse of the White House, and some lobbyists even managed to get turned in order to better represent their demonic special interests. The taxation of churches was quickly approved by an appeasing legislature. The goal was obviously to close as many areas of holy ground as they could. Gone are the days of being annoyed at a Jehovah's Witness knocking on your door. Now we've got to worry it's a vampire trying to trick you into inviting them in. It's been declared a hate crime to fight back. Steaks have been outlawed, and garlic is banned from being imported or grown. Some underground dispensaries can be found if you have the right connections. The hydroponic industry doesn't just support marijuana anymore. There are population control bills being debated in committees. People are starting to realize we can't let our numbers grow out of control when so many Americans are now able to live forever. Naturally, the rich got in on the action as soon as it became profitable, and then they made it cool. Hollywood movies glamorize vampirism, and they mock all other supernatural identities. If you think werewolves have it bad, mummies have it even worse. They get no coverage at all. The media is mum. As for zombies, they are treated marginally better since the first gentleman is a zombie, but I think it's just a marriage of convenience to solidify the undead voting bloc. As for swamp creatures, they're being erased by climate change. Witches don't even get lip service. Since they openly claimed to be around before the Great Unveiling, the vampires said they already had their chance to be taken seriously. It's becoming a vampire-centric nation of selfish ghouls chasing immortality and riches. I haven't slept much these past few weeks. Some of us who are still in favor of the living, not to be confused with pro-life, although we welcome anyone with a heartbeat, have banded together to form daytime vampire hunting groups. We've even got some werewolves helping us sniff out the bloodsuckers. The government calls it murder, but we call it self-preservation. I will not let my country be drained of its health, wealth, and actual blood. We have to take a stand. Steaks may be outlawed, but we are working on a plan. In a few weeks, there is a gala planned for a big art show. Many of the rich and powerful vampires will gather together to clink blood-filled glasses and toast some unholy abominations they call art. My friends and I are putting together a team that is going to take the fight to the fiends. This uprising may claim our lives, but we must put a stop to this madness. I've got a titanium neck guard, a squirt gun full of holy water, and my body will be greased with garlic oil. I'll be going in as a distraction while the real operation unfolds. Keep an eye out for our Declaration of Independence, and don't buy into the hype. This won't be a tragedy for vampires. We'll just be sending them back to the hell in which they belong. Pray for our success. And for God's sake, please stop voting for politicians who are trying to kill you. There's a werewolf in my town. I didn't believe in it until recently. I think the sightings first started up about 10 years ago. That's the same time my family moved to this town. I was only 12 at the time. Since then, many have claimed to have seen some sort of wolf or hyena-like animal running around. Supposedly, it roams the forest right next to our neighborhood at night. I went around and interviewed the eyewitnesses. Every description was the same. They said it has thick brown fur and bright blue eyes. It also has the ability to stand on its hind legs and is about my height when fully upright. These sightings are common enough that even the law enforcement officers believe in this werewolf. They say there are no officially recorded wolves or mountain lions or any other similar animals in this area that could explain the sightings. They've also tried to catch it more than once, but it clearly has human-level intelligence, since it has always been able to evade them. And no one knows where it goes during the day. The sightings just seemed to get more and more common as the years flew by, to the point where even my parents had claimed to see it once or twice. My mother says she saw it running across a road while driving home from work late at night, while my father said he saw it creeping around our front yard, before leaping over the fence and running back into the woods where it lurks. Everyone in this town claims to have seen this werewolf at some point, except for me. I don't believe in the thing. Why should I? Everyone knows eyewitness accounts are the least reliable form of evidence, since they can easily be fabricated, exaggerated, or misinterpreted. That said, just recently, some extremely convincing physical evidence has been found. For instance, some people have photographed large footprints clearly canine in origin, but much larger than that of a fox or coyote. More gruesomely, hikers have been finding carcasses with their necks and spines violently snapped open with powerful bone-crushing jaws. Ever since these deaths turned up, everyone in town has been keeping their pets and livestock indoors at night for safety, especially since the creature seems to be losing its fear of humans, hence the recent sightings of it in urban areas. One of our elderly neighbors even claimed she saw it digging through her garbage right by her window. She says it turned right in her direction, before going over to the window, pressing its muzzle against the glass and breathing powerful, hungry breaths before she ran to her bedroom, pulled the blanket over her head, and stayed there until morning. After hearing that story, I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. Even if it wasn't a werewolf, there was clearly something in our town wreaking havoc. Maybe a feral dog, or even an escaped hyena that someone was keeping as an illegal exotic pet. I decided I was going to try and catch the creature on film myself, no matter how difficult it would be. I set up a camouflage tent in the backyard, right next to the forest, and brought with me a headlamp, a video camera, and a gun. The latter I brought just in case I needed to defend myself from this animal. I set the camera up on a stand right outside the tent, pointed towards the woods, before crawling into my tent, zipping the door shut, and falling asleep. The next morning, I felt a breeze coming from the front of the tent. I sat up and nearly had a heart attack when I saw that there was a gigantic hole torn in the tent door. I peeked out of the hole and noticed the chewed-up carcass of a turkey lying in front of the tent, along with large paw prints surrounding it. He was here, I thought. I wanted to be excited, but I was mainly terrified. I had been extremely close to being this animal's dinner. The animal had torn open my tent, then for whatever reason, decided I wasn't worthy of a meal. Maybe the videotape will explain everything. I hooked the camera up to my computer and uploaded it before examining the footage. At the very beginning of the video, I saw myself setting the camera up before stepping out of view to get into the tent. The next hour of footage was unfortunately corrupted for whatever reason, so I skipped ahead another few hours. At approximately 3 a.m., I saw a big furry wolf-like creature walk out of the woods, its eyes shining brightly in the dark. It was carrying the same dead turkey from before in its jaws. The creature then walked over to the tent, dropped the turkey to the ground, and reared up on its hind legs like a bear. I felt chills run through my skeleton as the animal leaned forward and disappeared completely from the camera. Not only had it torn open my tent, but it had crawled into the tent with me as I was sleeping. I held my breath, desperately waiting for the animal to come crawling out of my tent and run back to the woods where it came. But it never did. Instead, as the sun rose up over the backyard, I saw myself climb out through the hole in the tent, walk over to the camera, and shut it off. After the footage was over, I felt anxious and confused. Even though that shot of it entering the tent was out of view of the camera, I'd expect to see some sort of movement from its paws as it tore the tent open. It was as if the opening in the tent was already there when it entered the yard. Had it torn the tent open in the corrupted footage? Also, if it had slept with me in the tent the entire night, how come it wasn't there when I woke up? The footage should have shown it going through the opening, and it's not like there was any other way of leaving the tent. Then it hit me. I suddenly remembered all those mornings where I would wake up with dirty hands and feet for no explainable reason, and those mornings where my breath would smell worse than usual, as if I had devoured a whole bunch of rotting meat as a midnight snack. My heart sank. The entire room began to swirl around me as I struggled to stand. All of the pieces were falling into place. Why the creature only appeared at night, while I was sleeping? Why I was the only one in town who had never seen the thing? Why the camera had caught it entering the tent, but not leaving? It turns out, the camera had caught the creature leaving the tent. And that creature was the one who set up the camera in the first place. The shepherd and the lonely werewolf. It took me 12 nights to figure out what the littlest werewolf wanted from me. I'd stand in the sheep pasture at twilight and glare at her as she crouched in the sagebrush, her unblinking golden eyes tracking my every step. My old sheepdog Zeus would bark and claw in the red dust, agitated and protective, yet too lazy to make chase. But the wolf never tried to steal a sheep. She never moved at all. At least, not unless I broke her gaze and looked away for a moment. Then I'd glance back, and she'd be gone, in an instant disappearing into the pinyon and juniper trees of the Hummingbird Hills, that sunless thicket where the less benevolent of the gods were rumored to lurk. I'd stand quietly and listen to her mournful howl bring down the moon, a bewailing that echoed through the canyons and vibrated the dry grass beneath my feet. Kill the white man seemed to be her lament, carried on the cool night winds. Kill him. Her words confounded me. There were certainly no white men around here. Living in a remote pueblo in the desert canyonlands of northern Arizona, the only white men I ever encountered were the occasional sheriff's deputy or government agent, well-intentioned Mormon missionaries promising a marvelous afterlife, or anthropologists fascinated by our complex pantheon. All of these visitors were politely escorted away. Even still, the presence of the little wolf bedeviled me, for I quickly understood that I was the only one who had yet seen or heard her. "A real wolf, Papa?" my youngest daughter Ariadne asked me one morning, as I told her and her sisters the story over breakfast. "Or a creature quite like it," I said, finishing my cereal with one hand, stirring sugar into my coffee with the other. "I reckon there's a breath of something primate and conscious in there." "What makes you think she's not all wolf?" my middle daughter Antiope asked. "She crouches in the same place every day and never looks at the sheep. She watches me alone, with the saddest of eyes. Her ears flick at the sound of my voice, and her own howl is unusually expressive and forlorn." "But a human can't howl," my oldest daughter Arachne declared. "Maybe she's a god in disguise," I said, winking at her. "Or their half-human child, the daughter of a wolf god, born to a human mother who feared it so much she abandoned it in the desert to die." My wife Leah suddenly dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, and I turned in surprise. I hadn't noticed her there, standing at the stove, listening to the conversation. "What do you think it is, Mama?" Antiope asked her, unconcerned. Leah shrugged and took a sip of her coffee from the mug in her hands. I looked, but saw no broken mug. I blinked, figuring I'd only imagined the loud smash and the fragmented splinters of earthenware. "Isn't the Fish and Wildlife Service reintroducing gray wolves around here?" she said. "They're trying to clear the overpopulation of deer at the Grand Canyon. Maybe one of those wolves wandered across." "Maybe," I agreed. "But this one speaks to me, I think." "Just like Annie Cassandra," Ariadne said. "She hears the wind speak to her in human words. It makes her twitch and fall down asleep, and behind her eyes she sees the faces of the gods who make the wind." "Cassandra's mind is very ill," Leah said. "Leave her alone, and leave the wolf alone. If it is a god, it's best not to meddle in whatever task it must complete. Would anyone like some coffee?" The brewer steamed and hissed. The radio buzzed and hummed the morning news and the weather reports. I had to admit, I couldn't dispute my wife's assertion, but I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't get the narrative out of my head of the little cub with a mortal mother and a divine father, a child with an uncanny inclination towards turning canine when the moon rose in the sky. It brought a little spark of thrill to the slow turn of life, the life of society's outliers, out among the barren rust-colored desert. Letting my imagination run wild, I thought of my son, somewhere far from home, being cared for by the spider god who called him her beloved. I gazed at my daughters, young and vulnerable, yet so untamed and wild. I thought of the human mother who might, at this moment, be wondering where her little half-divine wolf cub was huddling, imagining her child lost among the old trees and the voices of the night. Was she scared? Was she hungry? Was she shivering with cold in these crisp autumn evenings after the sun went down, yearning for the familiar warmth of home? I loved my own children more than anything. I understood that primal, animalistic urge to protect one's defenseless offspring. My heart softened towards the staring and unmoving cub. Her origins were an enigma to me. But, were she my own daughter, I'd certainly hope another parent would be there to keep a vigilant eye on her and listen to her unspoken desires. The next evening, I began to bring small scraps of mutton and elk jerky to the wolf girl. She'd cower if I walked too close, pulling back her lips to show me her gleaming white fangs. "Kill the white man," she rasped, in a voice like radio static. "First you must eat," I whispered affectionately. "Then you may kill whatever ghost you happen to find." I was often close enough to smell her, only briefly. She carried the sweet scent of burning sagebrush and tobacco in her fur. Once, I thought I saw a single tiny, glistening tear emerged from her sunken eye and rolled down her snout. "Kill him," she howled from afar. "Kill what man?" I asked. "There is no white man here. Only me, and I'm the only one who knows you're here. Why won't you let me help you?" She stared, silent as ever. But she did not run from me that evening. Encouraged by her sprouting interest in being nurtured, I turned up a few old baby blankets. Within their folds, I tucked bits of fragrant lavender and soothing catnip. I left them under a pinyon tree near the border to the dense forest of the Hummingbird Hills. I'd taken care of her hunger and her shivering. All I could do now was try to heal her loneliness, to take her somewhere warm and inviting, and reunite her with the family from whom she surely must have been forced to depart. But that was not to be. On the 12th day, I was paid a visit by a deputy of the county sheriff. I was spending a lazy autumn day in the kitchen garden, checking the tall stalks of blue corn for ripeness, pulling back the husks to get a swift glimpse of their deep indigo kernels, their rare beauty as hidden and lustrous as a dragon's cache of jewels. For a moment I imagined myself the hero of that story, slaying the dragon and stealing its bounty. He didn't see me watching him as he drove up the winding road that spiraled around the mesa on which our pueblo was perched. His clunky white pickup truck rumbled and roared across the ancient bridge of bones that connected Mercury Mesa to Jupiter Mesa, and followed the dusty red road to where I stood, a fat husk gripped too tightly in my hands. Deputy Babbitt got out of the truck and faced me, covering the gun on his hip, watching my hands, avoiding my eyes. Babbitt didn't much care for people like me. We didn't much care for deputies. "Sir," he nodded, trying to look casual in a place so backward and foreign to a white man. He swept off his sun-bleached cowboy hat and leaned against the hood of the truck, stubbing out his cigarette with his pale leather boot. "How's everything going around the farm? How's your wife and that beehive of daughters?" I looked over my shoulder to make sure my family was safe inside the house. I remembered then that Leah had taken the children along to see the traveling carnival in Conab. Zeus was probably asleep in the sheep pasture. "Mr. Beartooth," Babbitt said when I didn't answer, "I've heard a rumor that you've spotted a wolf nearby, one that's stalking your sheep and eating your food." "Rumor?" I said. "Gossip, certainly. There haven't been wolves around here for 50 years. You ought to know that. Who told you I'd seen a wolf?" "Cassandra Maldonado. She won't speak to me, but I heard her young daughter's gone missing, and I believe the girl may have been dragged away by the wolf your kids are telling everyone about." Poor Cassandra. Her daughter was all she'd had. But if there was anyone who craved utter solitude, it was Cassandra. She lived a hermetical life on the dusty outskirts of the pueblo, with only her cows for company, and we all assumed that's the way she wanted it. I myself had always been uneasy around her, never sure what to say or where to look when I'd bring her gifts of surplus peaches, and she'd begin to yelp and swear and convulse. But we all avoided her, back then. We told ourselves it was what she needed. I was vaguely sorry to hear her child was missing. I'd forgotten she had a child. I turned my back on the sheriff's deputy and back to my corn. "I've told you all I know," I said to him, my fingers idly digging at the brittle husks, not knowing even what they were doing. I hoped he wouldn't see my hands shaking. "I think it's time for you to leave, deputy." Babbitt was quiet for a long moment. "Well, I have the feeling there's something else you're not telling me," he said, his voice as low and discordant as a rattlesnake's tail. I clenched my jaw. I waited. I opened and closed a corn husk again and again, entwining my fingers in the gossamer green tassel, feeling the taut bulge of milk beneath the swollen kernels. I glanced at the garden shears on the opposite side of the garden, imagining the crunch they'd make as they sheared off the man's nicotine-stained fingers. There was a sound of a door opening and closing. I turned around again. Deputy Babbitt was dragging a brownish-gray bundle from the bed of his truck. His hands and his white jacket were stained with its blood. I knew right away what I was seeing. Its fur was matted and dirt-clogged. Its caved inside was stained with a rust-colored smudge. Its tongue hung out of a mangled snout, and its amber eyes stared straight ahead, into my own eyes, as they always had, never breaking that line of sight. Babbitt dropped it heavily on the ground, and finally stared at me forthright. "Don't you ever lie to me like that again," he hissed into my face. "I've just done you a favor by shooting this dangerous animal, and now I expect to be thanked, not deceived. I put my life in danger for your flock, for your wife, for your children. You don't have to like me, but you do have to respect me. That's all I ask. There are worse predators out there than this one, and you have no idea what I've done for you. To let you people quarantine yourselves up here without interference. My family has lived in Arizona for a century, civilizing this barren dust bowl, trying to guide your people into the modern world, and all we get back from you is suspicion and scruple. Now don't you dare take my protection for granted and ruin it for the ones that want progress and improvement. Don't you dare violate that tenuous trust I've been generous enough to give, even as I overlook your flaws. Don't you dare. I glared, straight ahead, our faces so close I could smell the remains of his cigarette in his white mustache. I did not sever my gaze with his. I thought of the littlest werewolf, speaking through the silence, pleading with her eyes. He couldn't hold for long. He kicked the wolf's body with his white boot. So that's all you've got? He growled. No thanks, no gratitude? Does this dead menace mean nothing to you? You are nothing to me, I said. One day you, too, will lie in the sand, but you won't get a burial nearly as grand as hers. Your mouth will fill with dust and cornmeal. Your tongue will be replaced by a scorpion's tail. Your eye sockets will be the nursery for a rattlesnake's eggs. Your ribs will be made hollow by the sun and will whine in the wind like a bone flute. Is that a threat, he said, backing away, or a curse? Neither, I said. It's an expectation, an aspiration, an invocation. He gritted his teeth. Then he turned, smashed his hat back onto his head, and got into his truck. I waited for him to cross the bone bridge before I turned and crouched at the side of the little wolf girl, another father's daughter, my pollen-covered fingers stroking her ears, still soft, still listening to words carried on a wind that blew from another world, the land of the dead. I lay there until the sun set. Then I carried her down the mesa and buried her at the edge of the sheep pasture, the place where I'd first seen her, waiting, quietly begging me to listen to her wolf words. I smudged her nose and forehead with all the corn pollen remaining on my hands, as one does to both the newly dead and the newly born, as I had done to all my children and later to my father. Zeus watched for a while, sitting on his haunches, before he finally let out a low, ululating howl that echoed off the hills and resonated through the canyons and reverberated in the craters of the luminous silver moon. He led me back home, where Leah and the children had already gone to bed. In the night, I woke, feeling as if I'd heard my name whispered in a dream. I rolled over to watch the moon out the window, but the clouds had gathered, covering it in a pearlescent shroud. Hephaestus, a voice called to me into the stillness and the holy dark, a voice that sounded like Cassandra's. Hephaestus, she was pregnant. Too young to be, I said, and could not contain my tears. She was only 13. Too young, I said again. Too gentle to endure thee? I sat straight up. Was she born human? Not a wolf. Fully human, Cassandra whispered. Deeply loved. Who transformed her? The voice was silent. I looked down at Leah, asleep next to me, untroubled by the whispers. I wondered if I had only dreamt the conversation, for immediately it was lost in the haze of linear time, just like the coffee mug that had never shattered. Soon I too slept again, a restless doze that allowed my mind to walk barefoot across the desert sands, leaving no footprints, wandering under a swiftly spinning sky whose stars had no names. The following morning, I found the body of Deputy Babbitt at the far end of the sheep pasture. He had been scalped, flayed, and disemboweled, his entrails making spirals and curlicues in the dust. His throat had been torn out, left in bloody tatters of oozing, putrefying shreds of flesh. His genitals had been torn almost completely from his body, left dangling and mangled. His toenails and fingernails had been yanked out of their bleeding cuticles. His mouth, open in an eternal scream of agony, was stuffed with dried sagebrush and cactus thorns. His ribcage, splayed open to reveal a half-eaten heart and lungs, made a wailing, keening noise that swelled and receded with the icy wind. I looked at my fingertips, again dusted with corn pollen. Then I wiped my hands on my jeans and did not touch the dead man's forehead. From afar, I felt myself being watched. I turned. Watching me from the other side of the fence was an enormous wolf with green eyes that wept human tears. Its fur was black all over, like a person in mourning. It gazed at me not with fear or caution, as the young one had, but with attentive rage. "Who are you?" I asked, holding its gaze, my hand on the hunting knife at my hip. "It ought to be your wife lying there in the dirt, rotting alongside the man," said the black wolf, in a voice like the whispers I had heard in the clouded night. "Your dispute is not with Leah," I said. "She's done nothing wrong." "Leah never asked my permission to transform my daughter," said the black wolf. "She acted hastily, and by the time I found out what happened, she could not undo what she had done. My Ida didn't have to die. She didn't have to suffer in the cold night, alone and starving, wondering why this perversion had been put upon her." "I don't understand," I said. "I loved my daughter. I loved her. She was all I had. I would have loved her baby, in a way that nobody in this desert ever loved me. You've all rejected and abandoned me, forced me to live far away from everyone. You hated Ida for her slow mind and slow speech. You hated me for the way I twitched and fainted. Yet still I had no desire to be a wolf. Magic in the hands of one with an unsound mind is perilous. But when the deputy came around, talking rumors about my Ida, I transformed myself anyway to be close to my little one forever. And now it's too late. You've all killed her." The black wolf stepped closer to me. "Leah stole something from me, in more ways than one. She stole it to carry out her private vengeance on the white man. But my own vengeance is not complete. Warn your wife that when I see her again, I will tear her apart, piece by piece. I will prolong her suffering for years, as I replace her human body with this wolf's body. I refuse to become human again until I've been satisfied." Then she stood on her hind legs, becoming as tall and straight-backed as the tallest human. She bolted into the overgrown woods of the Hummingbird Hills, to where the sun refused to shine. I confronted Leah that night by the fireplace. "Don't keep secrets from me like that," I said, softly, restraining my impatience, my indignation. "I had every right," she said. "It's not the first and won't be the last." "Why, Leah? Why did you turn Ida into a wolf? You're not a shaman or a witch. You have no right to be using magic against a child. Why would you do something so contemptible?" Leah was listening to a record of Bach violin sonatas while she drank watermelon wine straight from the bottle. Its sweet smell could not overtake the steely scent of blood that saturated the room. She set it down, hard, on the wooden floor and looked me straight in the eye. "I was protecting Ida. When Cassandra showed me the black moth encased in amber, a gift she claimed to have been given by the wolf god White Paws, she swore it would turn me into a wolf. I could finally kill Babbitt with no consequences, as I had wanted to do for so long, but I found that I couldn't. I had too much to lose. I have a home, and children, and a job. Instead, when I saw Ida was pregnant, I gave the piece of amber to her and changed her into a wolf. I forbade her from telling her mother, and I sent her out into the desert to hunt that low-life scum." "Protecting her? From what? You seem to have tied a knot even you cannot untangle. I told you, Ida was pregnant. Who do you think was the father of her child? And who do you think is Ida's father, too?" "The deputy," I said, suddenly feeling small and simple for not making the connection until now. Ida had always been more light-skinned than the rest of us, and we had mistrusted her because of it. What an abomination for a man to beget a child on his own daughter. "I gave Ida a gift," Leah continued, "the gift of carrying out vengeance. The only gift I could give that would match the generosity of a wolf god. I would have wanted that privilege for myself years ago. I was younger than she when Babbitt raped me, and my rage had a knife's edge. I raged because I was powerless, and his power is so unbounded that he killed Ida anyway, not to protect himself from the accusation, but because he could. Eventually, he would have found some other girl to victimize, and then what would we do? Turn all our girls into a colony of bats? Would you want to see your own daughters hanging upside down in a cave all day, unable to live a beautiful life in the sunshine? I admit I used magic that did not belong to me, and which I had no right to try to control. But you need to understand that I only intended to protect the girl. I told Ida she must be the one to slay Babbitt, to force him to look into her eyes in the moment of his death, to regret his actions, to understand that the consequences were finally catching up with him. And once he was dead, I promised Ida I would find a way to make her human again. She never had the heart to kill him, I said. Too gentle a soul, abused until she had no will of her own. Too meek to stain her teeth with blood. Her blood is on your hands. Hephaestus, Leah said, again changing the subject. What about your role? Ida was begging you to kill the deputy. The white man. The white man in the white truck with the white hat and the white boots. Why didn't you do it? Once you saw that she had failed to take him down. He was here, the day she was shot. You didn't tell me, but I could smell his scent all over the ground. When I arrived home, nobody would have seen you cut his throat. Nobody would have known. The gods would have devoured the body and protected you from the consequences had you asked. Why didn't you avenge me? Avenge Ida? Avenge all his past and future victims? Why didn't you listen to her cries? You overlooked her human desires and ignored what she was saying with her human voice. You treated her like some spoiled household dog who only wants a bed and a belly rub. Don't lay the burden of shame on me, I said. You misled me. You told me she was an ordinary wolf and to leave her alone. How could I have known Ida would fail? Clearly I'm not as clever or powerful as you think me to be. Leah scowled. A child is dead, she said, and all you care about is shifting the blame to anyone but yourself. You sound an awful lot like Babbitt right now. You're wrong, I fumed. I have been humbled, Leah, and I believe you are the merciless one. You used magic stolen from a vulnerable mother and left a little girl in a body she didn't want. You forced a child to fight your battle, and now Cassandra will be forever stalking you. She has her canine stare fixed on you, on your every move. One day, she'll pounce and take her revenge on you, and she will tear you apart piece by piece, year after year, and replace your body with a wolf's. And I will never be powerful enough to protect you. I can't. The blanket around her shoulders fell. She quickly pulled it back up, but not before I saw a flash of the gray-brown of a wolf's furry foreleg, hastily stitched onto the bleeding stump of her elbow with greasy sinew. I looked up from the fresh wound. I met her eyes. She glared back at me, eyes fiery, but I could not hold her gaze. I bent my head, and I hid my face in my hands.